Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are and what time it is. This is going to be a fairly short video. As I said at the beginning, some of the lessons you're exposed to in the academy are kind of boring. This might be one of those, but it's kind of important also. When you stop and think about it, we have to abide by all of these rules and laws, and we enforce these laws, and those all come from the U.S. Constitution, and that's what this class is about. I'm going to try to keep this one pretty short. You should have learned most of this when you were in your general education in public schools or private schools, homeschooling, whatever. Anyway, there's a few parts of the Constitution that are very relevant to law enforcement. I'll hit on those a bit, but mostly I'm just going to try to move through this. I'm going to have to use my cheat sheet a little bit because I can't memorize the whole basics of the Constitution. But well over 200 years ago, some very wise men got together and put together a document known as the U.S. Constitution. They'd been under tremendous pressure from the British, who they'd escaped from and started America. And these framers of the Constitution had several drafts of the Constitution before they decided on one that they would go with. At the time, there were 13 states, all up in the northeast portion of the country. And each state had some representatives that attended the writing and formalizing of the Constitution. So these 42 or 43 participants from the 13 states all participated. Of course, we're more familiar with Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, and of course our first president, George Washington, as being the founders of the Constitution. But in reality, there was a large group. Now, in order for that to become what it is today, what we live by, what all of our laws are based on, I think 9 of those states had to approve it, to have it ratified, and that obviously happened. So the original Constitution had 7 parts, and I'm going to have to look at some notes here to make sure I don't leave one of them out. These were articles. There were 7 articles to the original Constitution. The first one established the difference between legislative, executive, and judicial branches of the government, the separation of powers, so to speak. So the legislature, as you know, consists of our Congress folks. In the House of Representatives, I think there's 435, I believe, is what it's limited to. And of course, in the Senate, there's 2 from each state. Now, some states, like California, has a large population. It's based on districts, how many people are in the House of Representatives. I think California has 53 representatives in the House of Representatives. And a state like Idaho has only 2. So it's based on population and districts that are built around those population groups. So it took care of the legislative part. The executive part had to do with establishing the functions of those groups, and again dealt with separation of powers. Now, Article 2 dealt more with the executive branch and the president and the vice president, laid out what their requirements would be to be able to run for president and what their duties would be as president and vice president. Pretty cut and dried. Article 3 established the judicial branch. So we had the legislative branch, the House and the Senate, the executive branch, the president and the vice president. Now we're dealing with the judicial branch, which established the court systems. And of course, the Supreme Court being the highest court. Each state has lower courts, and all the way right down to your local county, district and county courts, and even municipal courts. So that was the judicial portion of the Constitution. The Article 4 provided that individual states could have additional rights if they needed them. It wasn't really specified what those rights might be, but it gave them the power to have some discretion in what they might do. Article 5 provided that additional amendments could be added to the Constitution, which kind of goes back to the previous act. The Article 6 was what they call the Supremacy Clause. It made sure that everybody from the legislative branch to the executive branch to the judicial branch, so all of the representatives and senators, the president, the vice president, and all of the judges would have to take an oath to support the U.S. Constitution in order to hold those offices. The seventh, is what I talked about earlier. For that all to become law, the U.S. Constitution being put into place and the supreme law of the land, 9 of those states would have to approve that to ratify it. So that takes care of the acts. Now, it said that there could be additions, and those are called amendments. There's 10 amendments to the original Constitution. The first one, the First Amendment is a very big one. It's the right to freedom of religion, freedom to move around in the public, freedom to say what you want, freedom of speech, those kind of things. Those become big issues even today, and a big issue for law enforcement. You're going to be dealing with the freedom of speech issue all the time. And it allowed for people to petition grievances against the government. So it had a lot to do with individual freedoms. The Second Amendment, another big one, and our country kind of 50-50 on this one, it's the right to bear arms. That's a big issue now. It's going to continue to be a big issue. Like I say, I'd say the country's divided about 50-50 on that one. The Third Amendment is kind of an odd one. It had to do with soldiers during peacetime could not stay in someone's residence without the owner's permission. So I'm assuming back in the early times, during wartime, a soldier could take up residency or hideout, whatever they needed to do in an individual's residence without their permission. But during peacetime, they would have to have their permission. Kind of an odd one. The Fourth Amendment, this is a big one for law enforcement. It protects people from unreasonable search and seizure. Obviously, you're going to deal with this one a lot. People have a right to their persons, their places, their things. So the Fourth Amendment, and we're going to talk about that a little more when we finish up here, is a huge one. You're going to deal with that a lot. The Fifth Amendment is what they call the Show Cause Amendment. In order to bring someone before the courts or to indict them for a charge, you'd have to show cause. And that brings us to that term probable cause, which kind of plays into the search and seizure, the Fourth Amendment, and this show cause issue on the Fifth Amendment. Probable cause is information that, if provided to a prudent average citizen, was enough in itself to convince that reasonable person that a crime had occurred, that this particular person committed the crime, or that the crime had occurred and that evidence related to that crime might be found in this certain location, someone's house, garage, business, whatever. So that probable cause would have to be put in an affidavit, an application for a search warrant or an application for an arrest warrant possibly, and then swore to, signed, and presented to a judge. So along with the Fifth Amendment, there was the issue of double jeopardy. You can't be charged twice for the same crime. You don't have to be a witness against yourself. They can't force you to take the stand and testify against yourself. Those all fall under the Fifth Amendment. The Sixth Amendment has to do with speedy trial. Different crimes have what they call a statute of limitations. Say on a misdemeanor, usually 1 year to charge someone on a misdemeanor. Felony cases often have a statute of limitations of maybe 5 years, and in more serious crimes like murder or sexual assault, sometimes it can go on forever. Won't go into the details of that, but it's kind of common sense, especially in sexual assault. Sometimes when someone is assaulted when they're young, they're embarrassed, they don't want to come forward. So our laws, our statute, give them time as they become adults to come forward with that information when they're more comfortable. Moving on to the Seventh Amendment, and that has to do with the right for people to go to court for civil grievances. So you can sue somebody in court. That's where that comes from, the Seventh Amendment. The Eighth Amendment has to do with excessive bail. So we can't put somebody in jail and have a several $1,000,000 bond on that person for a minor crime. So it concerns how much the bail can be to hold someone in jail. And it also has to do with cruel and unusual punishment. Every state has guidelines for what the minimum and maximum penalty for different crimes would be. That all comes from that amendment, number 8. Number 9, how do I say this? It actually says that there can be additional rights that are not mentioned in the Constitution or in these amendments. And that has already been stated. Additional amendments could always be added. It gives the states rights to alter maybe the Constitution to some extent. And the 10th of the amendments, gives the states, again, the powers to do kind of what they want, as long as they're not totally violating the Constitution, if they're not doing something outrageous. The marijuana issue right now is kind of a big deal. So some states have legalized it, although the federal government has not legalized it. So we're waiting for DEA and the legislature to change those laws. So all these states that are selling marijuana technically are violating federal laws. It's not being enforced right now by the feds, but it's at the forefront of everybody's mind. So basically, that's the U.S. Constitution. The ones that are important to you are the Fourth Amendment, obviously, unreasonable search and seizure. That's going to be a big part of your job. The Fifth Amendment, the show cause, which has to do with probable cause before an arrest is made or before a search warrant or an arrest warrant can be issued. And the sixth one is more of the courts, but has to do with speedy trial and unreasonable bail and bond and that kind of thing. So that's the U.S. Constitution in a nutshell. Probably the shortest of the videos that I'm going to do, the lessons that I'm going to do. Stuff that you should know. But most importantly, you just need to realize that the 4th, 5th, and 6th are the ones that really affect law enforcement. So that'll be it for today. Should have known this stuff in junior high probably, but you're going to have to review it when you get to the police academy. So that's it. Have a good day. See you next lesson.